Welcome to this Autism Ontario webinar, Ask the Doctor, Healthy Sexuality from Puberty to Adulthood for Autistic Youth and Adults. My name is Matthew Lay, and as always, I will be your host. Today, we are joined by Isabelle Hénault. She's a sexologist and a psychologist, and will be walking us through our agenda today. Before we get started, I do have a few things that I need to address. So first off, opinions reflected in this webinar are those of the speakers and the presenters and do not necessarily reflect Autism Ontario's views. Please note, Autism Ontario does not endorse any specific therapy, product treatment strategy, opinion service, or individual. We do, however, endorse your right to information. Autism Ontario strongly believes that it is important to do your own research and make informed decisions. And these webinars just help you do that. With the aim of being inclusive, respectful, and representative of the many voices within our diverse community, we will use both identity first and person first referential language. We acknowledge that the use of language evolves rapidly and will continue an ongoing discussion within the autism community. So, a big part of what I do on these webinars is to get you answers to your questions. You can submit those questions at any time using the Ask a Question box located on the webinar console. A reminder that during this presentation, we can't answer specific questions pertaining to your individual child or an individual you may know or work with. We will be discussing general strategies, and we will talk about where you may find additional information and other professionals who may help consult with you for follow-up. Before you consider an intervention type, you should first get clearance from your pediatrician or family doctor or rule out any health or medical factors that could be playing a factor. Now, on that topic of questions getting answered and the like, we know many of you asked for books on this topic. So I'm going to direct you to the resources or the handout section. There, you'll be able to find a number of resources, including resources as it relates to books, a list of books that help dive further into the topic that we are discussing today. Finally, if you have any issues, click on the help button. And this whole webinar, if you're loving it this much, reminder, it will be recorded and available on demand tomorrow on the Autism Ontario website. All right, that's a lot off the top. Now, my heavy lifting is done. So let me introduce Dr. Isabelle Hénault. Elizabeth, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Autism Ontario. It's a pleasure to join you today.
So today we're going to be talking about issues with development, puberty, love, and affection. Clearly an important topic, but maybe you can give us just a little bit on your background, Isabelle, as well as what we can expect to learn from today's webinar.
Yes, so I'm a psychologist and a sexologist from the Autism and Asperger's Clinic at Montreal. We're a group of experts, 10 of us, working with children, teenagers, and adults. And years ago, I'm getting older. 19 years ago, I was starting my PhD research at Montreal, and I was very interested in the topic of healthy sexuality and education. And at that stage, there was very minimal information on autism, or as we used to call Asperger syndrome, and education. And I was working with a group of teenagers, and they said to me, we need more information, guidelines. We need to discuss sexuality. We have so many questions. Although sometimes parents may say, I don't feel that my son or my daughter seems interested. But once they were with us in group format or individual sessions, they had tons of questions. So I've decided to work on this topic, and now it's been close to 19 years, and I find it so important. And this is what I'll be presenting today. So you learn about the sexual profile of teenagers and adults. We'll talk about different factors that will influence the development. We will talk about healthy sexuality, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of different strategies, books, and guidelines as you were referring and the introduction on all these important aspects as prevention and education.
Excellent. Okay, well, lots to get to, so let's get into it right now. And let's first talk about the Autism AS profile.
Yes. So if we just, I think, explore the first topic that everyone knows, it's the social abilities. It's very important to address social skills, social rules, because we know many teenagers and adults may misread these cues, and then it leads to social mistakes. And overall, when I work with teenagers and young adults, they say to me, either they have been misinterpreted in the past, they made mistakes, and unfortunately, it may increase the social anxiety. So when you make mistakes and you're teased or bullied or you feel different than the majority of your peer group, it leads to this social anxiety. And that's why, although we talk about sex education today and healthy sexuality, it is part of the program that we usually recommend to really help them understand and feel more confident when it comes to social skills and also relationship. Because the moment you talk about being friends with someone, or eventually for some adults having a boyfriend, girlfriend, these social skills are very important. Another aspect is the communication abilities. We know that some individuals may sometimes have difficulties reading verbal or nonverbal cues. And when it comes to steps in relationship, we will teach them with practical pictures. We use videos. So most of the material we have developed throughout the years is fun to work, in fact, with. So we will teach them recognizing these cues to make sure that they read well and they won't fall in a relationship where they misread that could lead eventually to unfortunate situation. And one of the key points here in most of the material I'll be exploring with you, and the topic is a key point, is what we call theory of mind. And we know with autism, it may be difficult for some individuals to understand that people think in different ways. So I have my emotions, people may have different emotions. How can I read also emotions in other people, different way of thinking? And I usually explore it with, when we refer to a cartoon, when you have the thought bubble. So I'm thinking in one way, but the other person may think in a different way. And when it comes to healthy sexuality, this is really, really important to teach them abilities to read properly other people's way of thinking, to avoid abuse, of course. And that leads to the notion of consent. I know in the questions there were lots of them relating to how can I teach consent to my son or daughter. And this is a tricky one. I've been thinking about this issue for years now. And that's why we usually start with teaching theory of mind, and then we can teach consent. The way to teach consent is first, how can I give my consent? I think years ago we were sometimes a bit quick on teaching other people's consent. Are they okay? How does the other person feels? But first, I need to be able to give my consent. So am I feeling comfortable? Do I really understand what the other person is referring to? So we have developed some fact sheets, role-playing situation, we have pictures, we read scenarios, and we also refer to a very good questionnaire that will be given for free to all participants. This is from my colleagues at the Young Adult Institute in New York, where they developed this tool on how to teach consent to teenagers and adults. So that's a very important tool and such an important topic to avoid being in a situation of abuse, or sometimes creating uncomfortable situation because we may misread how the other person is feeling and thinking. Another part of the program is the emotions, because when it comes to puberty, sexuality, relationship, each individual will also feel a lot of emotions. So we teach how to detect their own emotion, how to read other people's emotion, and how to express emotions properly. So this is usually what we refer to lots of programs, in fact, that we all know about, but emotion regulation is very important. Especially, I will talk about puberty in a few minutes, where teenagers will experience lots of emotions that can be intense, they may fluctuate. So part of it, and it's not far from sexuality, because the moment you are relating to a friend or partner, there will be lots of emotions involved. So this is what we also address in our program. We also take into account routines. When it comes to sexual behaviors, I will talk about this in more details later on. We know that sometimes we may have children or teenagers or even adults who may develop routines when it comes to sexual behaviors. If the behaviors are appropriate, that's not an issue. But when it comes to inappropriate behaviors that sometimes they may have observed in the community, online, on internet, and they may repeat these behaviors out of a routine. So we will have to explore the different content, steps in the routines, and if we feel that this is inappropriate in terms of behaviors, we will teach them adapted behaviors, adapted routines that eventually they can follow through. So there will be some notions of steps in relationships later on and steps of healthy behavior. And always remember, we think that about 70% of autistic individuals have sensory issues when it comes to the different stimuli in the environment. And to be more practical here with sexuality, I'm referring to the touching one. So many of our clients, and when I work in schools, we refer to the same idea that they may find it uncomfortable being in contact with someone, having cuddles. It may feel like very, very uncomfortable. And when it comes to sexuality, in some cases, if I have to work with someone who seems to have inappropriate behaviors, I will take into account the sensory profile. Is the child or adolescent or adult had high sensory reaction or low reaction, because that could lead in some cases to inappropriate sexual behaviors. So this is part of the, I would say, the fact sheet. Whenever we think about sexuality, we have to take into account all these factors. And finally, in the last years, we discovered that unfortunately, when we compare the knowledge that teenagers or adults should have about sexuality, there is big lack of information. Some never had sex education programs before. They may find themselves quite isolated when it comes to sharing information if they don't have access to a peer group or friends they could relate and listen to what other friends discuss about sexuality. And when there's lack of information and education, there is unfortunately a higher risk of having inappropriate behaviors or being in a situation of abuse because you don't have the basic knowledge. And that's why sex education is very important for our students. And I've been working in this field for so many years and still very motivated because we see, coming from education, we reduce the risk of abuse. We also have one last information here. If you have a child, teenager, or adult who have co-occurring conditions, you have to take them into account when you design your sex education workshop or if you do intervention. As you know, there can be a combination of ADHD that may bring impulsivity for some individuals. You may have Tourette. You may have also mood disorders such as depression or anxiety. So whenever I work with someone, I will also check if there are other conditions to make sure that my sex education program or intervention takes into account all these other conditions.
Okay. Get into the issues of development as it relates to this topic and sexual behavior.
So we know that many teenagers will explore sexuality, and this is just natural. Everyone is curious about sexuality. They may discover while they're showering, having a bath, that if they touch their private parts, it may bring a sensation. So for most of them, it's exploration, because when you think about a young child with autism, it's not sexual for them. And they have to learn about sexual parts of their body to make sure that they won't expose themselves in public places, or they won't touch other kids on their private parts, because they explore in most of the time a naive way. So that's why when we teach about puberty in a few slides, we'll talk about this, we're very clear about private parts of the body and what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. So exploring sexuality is part of the development of a majority of teenagers and even children. Sometimes they may feel frustrated, and that could, in some cases, bring more inappropriate behaviors. And here we are talking about this discrepancy in terms of friendship, experience, and wanting to explore sometimes relationship and finding that it is very difficult for some of them. In other words, many young teenagers, they say, I would like to have friends or boyfriend, girlfriend, but I'm more isolated due to my difference. And they may feel frustrated. And especially if they become more impulsive, that could lead to inappropriate behaviors. That's why I'm not encouraging sexuality. I'm encouraging healthy skills, building friendship, learning about intimacy, learning consent. So that will decrease the risk of inappropriate behaviors and also the frustration. Another very interesting topic is what we call gender identity and role definition. I won't have too much time to explore because we just have an hour, but just a few words that it's been now at least 10 years that we have more knowledge and clinical experience in terms of gender identity in autism. And we found in research as well that there seems to be more flexibility. In other words, is what my colleague, Dr. Tony Attwood, you may know of him, he calls it the Frank Sinatra my way. So, in other words, we know that many teenagers and adults, they won't necessarily follow the same social skills, social rules that says it's in our world generation at the moment, it's a binary model, means male and female. So they may go with their own journey. I feel a combination, a flexibility, and they may then have masculine, feminine traits, characteristics, interests that in fact they combine together, and it may not be a disorder. So we found that 30-40% of those with autism have more flexibility when it comes to gender identity. And it's not necessarily leading to becoming a trans person. So we have worked on a book. It's in the reference list if some of you are interested, where we can really understand more about this flexibility concept. And if we have a child or a teenager, and even sometimes adults who may question their identity, we use now a specific protocol to assess if there is gender identity disorder or dysphoria. That's the term we use in the DSM. But this is very interesting to see the more flexibility. And a colleague of mine, Marianne Corti, invented the term Autigen, meaning that there could be eventually the autism gender. So that's another important, interesting aspect. And also the social imitation. We know many children up to adults, they observe and then they may imitate different behaviors or attitude. And this is why we want to teach them, if they imitate a behavior, it has to be in the right context and they have to check consent. And that's going to lead us in a few minutes to talk about where do they learn about sexuality. So if they learn from models that are not adapted, like internet, pornography, for example, and they
or their friends in school.
Totally, who usually break the rules all the time. This is what my clients tell me. They say, Isabelle, you're teaching us healthy sexuality, consent, and tips. And I see, friends at school or colleagues at work who may break all these rules. And I say, you're absolutely right. But I want to make sure that you know what's appropriate and what's not, to make sure that it doesn't lead to inappropriate behaviors.
Right. Okay, we have a bunch of questions here, and I'm not sure if they're going to be developed later, but I want to ensure our audience that we're going to get our questions answered. So, this is coming from, I think it's a parent, it could be a caregiver, on how to both encourage sexual behavior while maintaining these expectations about when, with who, what's acceptable. Do you have any strategies for that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Again, I'm not encouraging sexual behaviors, but since there will be curiosity, it's really important to give guidelines. And this is why when we start, it's very simple, as soon as possible, to teach private parts of the body to avoid making mistakes. We will talk about private and public places as well. What's appropriate to do in a private place and what's appropriate in a public place, and what are the rules. We will teach steps in relationships, and all the material we've put in the referral section is exploring this in detail. So we start when usually students are 7, 8 years old, and if they are nonverbal, we use more visuals. We have videos, we have pictograms. Many pictograms are available for free in the documentation section that we have for today. And so we will teach step by step depending on the age of the student or the child, and eventually we will talk about advanced skills. A quick example to make it as practical as possible: I'm running a group at the moment with adults. They are all between 18 and 22 years old, and we're teaching them consent, steps in relationship, nonverbal skills, and it's a set of 12 different workshops that we've been organizing in a group format. And then we present material, we look at video, and then we discuss together. It's interactive. And it's very interesting to see the group, the interaction, because they learn a lot from each other. They can give their opinion, and me and my colleague who's a special educator, we give them advices. What's okay, what's not okay. Let's explore a scene. Okay, let's say the guy, he's touching, the girl on the shoulder. They don't know each other. Is this okay or not okay? What should she say? Is this consent or not consent? So we have built, in fact, a sex education curriculum to go and teach all these aspects. And also, I won't have time today, but we even talk about prevention of STDs and STIs. We talk about inappropriate behaviors. We talk about how to navigate safely on social media and internet. So we have all the material that has been published now for many years, and we adapt it to the age of each participants. And sometimes if we work with someone who may have also other conditions that makes it more hard for him or her to be part of a group, we will do individual sessions, and we will use the same material but take more time and make sure that they fully understand and mainly integrate the material, because sometimes they may repeat what they've learned but they don't fully integrate it. So that's why we put it in also natural settings. We work in schools, community centers. So that's why we have developed all these topics for the last years.
Okay, so you've dealt with almost everything in here, but there's one group that we haven't really hit on, and we're looking for strategies around teens.
Yeah.
So as they start to have, there's, with the young ones, I understand it's learning about what are private parts, what is appropriate, not. Clearly, when you're older, it's a much more, defined thing as they're when you're a teen and you're starting to have those feelings.
Yes.
Do you have strategies to help, I guess, explain those feelings to teens who are on the spectrum?
Yes, and that's so important. It's called relationship and affection. So we have developed with Tony Attwood, who's my good colleague, programs and activities where we teach words, gestures of affections. So if you are with a friend and you appreciate your friend, what can you say to your friend? What are the appropriate gestures, not to make the other friend uncomfortable? So we teach them also the context and the intensity. Because if I like my friend and I never tell my friend that I like to play with him as a teenager, we play, let's say, video games, my friend may think that I don't care. And in fact, my point here is learning to give feedback. And we've learned and observed over years that many of our teenagers, they don't give feedback. They may take for granted that if it's my friend should know that I like him or her. That's the theory of mine as well. So we teach them feedback with gestures and words, and we use the social circles. So for example, with a parent, what kinds of words or gesture I may have to show affection, or siblings. It won't be the same with my friends. It won't be the same with my teacher, for example. And if someone comes in my circle of intimacy and I don't really know this person, and this person is very, very, let's say, touchy, or wants to become friends with me maybe too quickly, what are the steps of the relationship? So this is mainly the topics that we teach teenagers. So it's really relationship, affection, and steps, because sometimes I don't think they do it with negative intention. It's usually lack of experience. They may be ready to have a boyfriend, girlfriend, and it's very interesting. They arrive at the clinic and they say, Isabelle, find me a girlfriend or find me a boyfriend. This is very common. And I say, okay, I'm happy with that, but first let's explore steps in relationship. The difference between acquaintances, a friend, a close friend, a partner. So we teach them the subtleties. And again, we have materials for that is very interesting. We have pictures where we explore the nonverbal aspect. Are they just friends? Are they becoming closer friends? We have videos. And also the thing is not to be too, let's say, impulsive or too quick, because again they may say I'm ready, but they may sometimes put the other person in a situation where they are uncomfortable because they don't check if the other person has same intention. So it's not that we want to slow down the process, but being too quick, you have a risk of losing your friend or eventually your partner. And then, of course, we talk about sexuality. We usually have questions from parents or our participants. They ask me very directly, Isabelle, is this okay to have sex on the first time that you meet someone? Is it safe? Should I say yes if the other person say, let's have sex together? Oh, hold on a second. So we will really explore with the groups or individual session, what are the pros, what are the cons? So again, I'm not promoting, I'm giving instruction, education, making sure that they are safe.
Excellent. Okay, well, guys, I know there's more questions coming in on that topic. We will have a chance to kind of jump back around at the end. Any questions we don't answer, we'll aspire to get you answers to, and there's a lot in the resource section. So let's move on, if we may, Belle, to factors influencing social and sexual development.
So years ago, Dorothy Griffith, coming from Ontario, who was such an inspiration for me, she mentioned that most of her clients had lack of information. So I kind of replicated her work when I started my PhD. And even now, I have to be honest with you, many teenagers and sometimes even adults lack of information about sexuality, but they are curious. So that's why we have to make sure that we provide the correct answers and the correct material. There's lots of limitations in the environment, meaning that if they don't have a chance to relate to friends and have a group they could relate to, they tend to be more isolated. And that's a very tricky issue for me as a clinician, because as I mentioned earlier, there is an increased risk of becoming depressed and or anxious. And the more you're depressed or anxious, the more they have a tendency to isolate themselves. And that's going to increase the gap between the information and the experience they should have as teenager and young adults. So that's why at the clinic, we're a center. I say clinic, but it's not a medical clinic. It's a center. We have a lot of social activities, gatherings that we organize. Some activities are organized with programs like social skills, sex education, etc. But we also encourage having fun time together, where we have a group who play music together. We have a group who they play video games. We have a cooking class as well. We have the Asperger group for the girls and the young women, where it's fun time. We learn about each other in a friendly way, and we develop more confidence in terms of social abilities. We want to break this feeling of being isolated. So there they can start to build friendship. They can start to learn about relationship in a natural context. And for me, this is very important. This gender segregation used to play a lot years ago, in meaning that there were more males than females diagnosed with autism. And that's a totally a different issue, but let me talk maybe a minute about this. For over 10 years now, have been interested in the female profile of autism, discussing with colleagues around the world. I had the luxury and the chance before COVID to travel a lot, and we've seen more and more girls and women coming to clinic and saying, when I look at the questionnaires or information online about autism profile, I can see myself in 50% of these symptoms or traits, but not so much. What's the cause? So in fact, very simple. Most of the questionnaire were designed for the male profile. And that's why so many girls and women went under the radar, if I can use this expression, or, following different professionals, and no one was very clear about it. So now we have a specific protocol for girls and women. We have questionnaires that have been validated in different universities around the world, French, English. I'd be happy to share this with you as extra information if some participants are interested. So now we have more girls and women receiving a diagnosis. And my goal as a clinician is not to stick a label and say, oh, here I found another person with the autism spectrum disorder label. Not at all. Is really to give guidance, information, and to say, if we have this profile, it's always better to learn as soon as possible to have adapted strategies and to learn about their own identity. So the gender segregation, many of my clients, when I was starting my practice, they were mainly boys, teenagers, and they were curious about sexuality. And since they didn't have access to girls and activities in group homes or sometimes in special schools, they were surrounded by boys. Many of them said to me, am I gay? Am I homosexual? And I say, why do you say that? Because I've never had experience with a girl, not even being friends. I'm not even talking about sex here. And I say, oh, so this is what also Dorothy Griffith was referring to. If you're surrounded by same sex, you won't have the same experience starting with friendship and relationship. So the good point is when we organize group sessions, as I said, leisure, fun activities, or even organized, we have mixed groups now, and they learn so much from each other. And I think this is very important. Now, a few words about internet and pornography. That's a huge topic in itself. We know that if you are curious, now in this generation, you're curious to learn about sexuality, you won't necessarily go and read a dictionary. You won't necessarily go and grab a book. You may go online. And if you're curious and you type sex or body parts, whatever, you'll fall under pornography website. Pornography is available everywhere. It's free. It's accessible, and it is, I'm going to be very strict here, maybe, sorry, but from my perspective and experience, it is a real trap for autistic people. Because if they don't know about sexuality and they learn from pornography, pornography doesn't use condoms protection, pornography doesn't relate to consent. And the more you look at pornography, and you have the risk of having what we call pop-ups appearing on top, middle, bottom slide of the image that you're looking at. If you press on it, you may fall on what we call second generation of pornography. That is really what we call the gray zone. Is it appropriate, not appropriate? Sometimes unsure. And if you click again, you fall under what we call now, that from my perspective is a real disaster, juvenile pornography. So this is, most of the images now at the moment are juvenile porn. For someone with autism, will they be able to judge the age? Will they be able to judge if it's legal or not? And unfortunately, in the last years, have been working with families, teenagers, and adults who fall in this trap of looking at inappropriate pornography, illegal material, without even knowing that it is illegal, because they are sometimes a bit naive, thinking if it's there, it's accessible, it must be okay. And some, unfortunately, had to face criminal charges because they may have downloaded or even share material without knowing that it's illegal. So having to be an expert witness at court, this is one of the main issue that now we teach all our students in the program, how to navigate safely online, what's legal, what's illegal. We have fact sheets, we teach them. We have a questionnaire. I designed a questionnaire with my colleague. It's 10 straightforward questions. So we handed out the questionnaire to all our participants. More than 90% of our teenager participants, boys and girls, they missed out the information. They failed our questionnaire. It meant they don't have the information. They don't know what's legal, what's illegal. So now we teach them. because there are, of course, as you can imagine, huge consequences. So we've decided to write a book with Tony Attwood and Nick Dubin called Autism, Sexuality, and the Law. So we teach in a very practical way what's okay, what's not okay, what's legal, what's illegal, and what are the consequences. And in the book, you have the story of Nick, who fell in the trap of internet, and he's explaining his story where he was arrested by the FBI in United States, and now how he's trying to recover from this traumatic experience by educating other teenagers and adults. And the book has just been translated in French few months ago. So I'm going to talk about this with the French community later on. But if some of you are interested or working with French speaking, also teenagers and adults, it's very important. And we're also trying to educate more and more policemen, lawyers, and also all the law field to learn more about the autism profile if ever someone is arrested. So that's a huge topic. But I've seen, honestly, good results since we're teaching the rules and what's appropriate or what's illegal. We've seen an increase in knowledge of our students and adults as well, and less consequences and less risk of falling in this trap of pornography.
Okay. And when does that trap start? Well, generally somewhere around puberty, different ages, clearly. This is lots of questions about this topic. Let's get in a little bit about what goes on during puberty.
Yeah, I won't teach you anything new today. You've all been through puberty yourself, but just a few words here. How it affects our students. They go through a lot of physiological change, and we say that in general puberty kicks in between the age of 12 and 14 because there's lots of hormones in the body, both for male and female, testosterone, estrogen. That's gonna bring body changes, body hair, sexual functions, reactions like erection. There will be also periods for girls. So all these physiological changes usually brings anxiety in our students. That's why, because they lose control over their body and they don't know what's happening and they cannot stop it. How many times I've heard when we do group session, they say, "Oh, Isabelle, I was much happier when I was a child because I know what it is to be a child. I don't know what it is to be a teenager." So the way we found to teach puberty is using videos, pictures, pictograms, if we work with someone who may have more traits that are severe, to teach step by step all the body changes that they will go through in a way to really normalize. That's the word I use, normalize. So it's okay. Everyone will go through this period. Everyone will have this and this. And we teach them. And every time we see that the anxiety decrease so much because they have knowledge. So that's very important. And there are lots of books and reference at the end of this session that we will share with you. And there's also psychological changes, moods, cycle. So normalizing teaching will be very important. Also, we will teach abusive or unfriendly relationship. What's okay, what's not okay. If someone is rude with me, someone is taking something out of me, if someone touched me on my private parts, is this good or not good? So again, the message is not to be afraid of sexuality, but to be able to recognize what's okay and not okay. We teach them dangerous relationship. There was a question, I may answer the question right away about ages. If my son or daughter is 15 with autism and being friend with someone who's 20, is this safe or unsafe? So we teach age group. When you're friends with someone, what are the behaviors that are okay? Playing video games, going for a walk, having a snack. But the moment it comes with relationship or being intimate, touching private parts of the body, this is not appropriate anymore. So we have these fact sheets to teach them. This is very important to make them aware. And this was one of the goals of designing my sex education curriculum years ago, is really to protect and to avoid our students falling in inappropriate situation. And at the end of our 12-week program, we have questionnaires and observation, and all our participants, teenagers and adults, are able to point out in scenes, and we have videos that we present to them, or it can be pictures, what's okay, what's not okay. They're all able to recognize good touch, bad touch. So that's very important. And on the other side, we teach them healthy relationship, because that's the other side of the medal that is in a way fantastic, is how to be in a relationship that is reciprocal, that is fun, is healthy, by sharing, good communication, how you can share pleasure, interest, etc. And referring to this slide here, you'll see in the reference section there is a document called Making Waves Program. It's free for parents, teachers, caregivers, and adults and teenagers also. They can download this program, and it's going to teach them how to recognize abusive relationship with quizzes, and situation that is described, and they ask you questions, and also how to develop healthy relationship.
Excellent. We're getting a number of questions about the workshops. People think this is a great idea. As a parent of a teenager myself, I think it's a great idea, regardless of anything. So, could you repeat a little bit of that information? And for all of you online, we're going to be looking for some links to some of these as well to make sure that we get them all to you. Yeah. But can you repeat some of the information on the workshop?
Of course, yes. So all the activities of the workshop are in my book called Asperger Syndrome and Sexuality. So the book has been published a few years ago, and the first section of the book is all the information I'm sharing with you today, and more, of course, sexual profile behaviors, how to deal with inappropriate behaviors and everything. And the second part of the book, it's the curriculum. So you have the 12 topics: love and friendship, sexual behaviors, intimacy, consent, prevention of STI and also other illness, protection. We have theory of mind. Everything is there in the book. So you can buy the book and use the program, individual sessions or group format. So many schools, organizations are using now the curriculum in classroom, in schools, and we've seen lots of good results for many years. So it's in the book.
Okay. On the topic of puberty, before we move on, parents are looking for where they might find strategies or suggestions for how to talk to their kids about masturbation in particular.
That's a good one. Yeah, we could spend a full hour on the topic of masturbation. So it's very important, because most of the young teenagers, they will start to explore masturbation, not knowing that this may be a sexual behavior, because they don't have the sexual idea in mind. But they have to learn quickly that this is private parts of their body, and this is a private gesture. So we teach that the only place where you can masturbate is alone in your bedroom, door closed. And you have to give the instruction, because this is the most, unfortunately, common behavior we see in autism, is touching their private parts in front of other people or in public places. So we explore why, and most of the time it's because they don't know. It's lack of knowledge. It's not because they want to make people feel uncomfortable or get attention. Very rarely it's because they didn't know. So we will teach using pictograms. If you touch your private parts, then we make a connection with your bedroom, door closed, alone, and this is okay. So we're not promoting masturbation, we're giving a framework. And if we work with a student who touch or she touch herself in the classroom, we will teach them systematically, again, private parts of the body. There is a place for that, and it's not in the classroom, because a classroom is a public place. The bus is a public place. The park is a public place. So I'm in the reference section, I give you access to a free program from the government of Quebec, and it's in English as well. You download all the section on masturbation, and you will have all the pictograms where you teach step by step. Once we go through this education phase that is usually simple, after 3, 4, 5 times we teach them in a very systematic way, they understand. If not, it may link to another issue. Sometimes we may work with an individual, male, female, who may not have the proper gesture, they don't know how to touch themselves properly, then we won't do education, we will do counseling. They need to be referred to a psychologist or a sexologist, where we teach them through pictures, pictograms, the right gesture, because they may hurt themselves, or they may do it inappropriately, or they may sometimes trust themselves on other people. This is not appropriate. So we will teach them the gesture that is appropriate, and there are programs for that. So it's in the referral section. It's more what we call advanced material. We never do it in group session. It's really counseling session. We have a protocol of education that has been also published in my book on Asperger syndrome and sexuality. It also referred to autism in general. There is a section on masturbation, what is educational part, and what could be the counseling part if someone masturbate inappropriately, or if someone use dangerous object to get sexual satisfaction, how we can deal with this problem.
There was a question in development about a teenager who doesn't want to masturbate or has no interest in it, and if there's any issues with that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any issue. We always leave masturbation as natural as possible. It means that this teenager may have a delay in terms of finding pleasure or exploring pleasure, and that's fine. So that's why we never encourage, we don't promote, we do intervention if there's a problem. It may happen later on for this teenager, as long as they are not doing it in public places eventually. Or we also teach hygiene as well. That's important. If you masturbate, there's a sequence of hygiene you need to respect. Washing your hands, washing your genitals, not leaving traces everywhere. But yes, there can be a delay, and that's why, in fact, when we go through the sex education program, there is not a specific topic on masturbation. We just teach private parts of the body, private public places, making sure that they know that this is a private behavior, and then we leave it naturally. But yes, it's not a problem, first sight, unless sometimes, if I go in more details, I always have to check if the person takes medication, because we know that there's no specific medication for autism, but to treat external condition. For example, antipsychotic, antidepressant, or anti-anxiety medication, some molecules may have an impact on the sexual function, erection, or ejaculation at time. So that's the question I would ask prior to, giving general advice. Is the person taking medication? If yes, what's the molecule? What is the also the dosage, and to see if there could be an impact. So you have to go online, check with the medication if that's the case, and usually in the side effects section, go down. The sexual one, they're always at the bottom of the page. That's always where I go first and check if there could be an impact on the sexual function.
Okay. So let's move on to exploring affection and talk about this a bit.
So we usually start with friendship with children, how to be a good friend. So if I want to play with my friend, it's taking or sharing turns. It's not always my rules. If I play the little policeman and I'm giving guidelines and I rule the games, I may lose my friends eventually. So that's important. We start with being a good friend, and then moving on to teenagers. If you think about eventually having a boyfriend, girlfriend, what are the steps? So that will lead to the other slide where we'll talk about consent, steps in relationship that are very, very important. And that's why when I was working years ago at Tony Attwood's clinic in Australia, I'm just making a quick story, but you'll understand while I'm talking about this. We were working with young teenagers, and they all said to us, it's very tough, because most of us they didn't say it in these words, but this is the message they were sending to us. We were quite isolated. Some of them were teased and bullied when they were young, not having a chance to have friends. And now they say, we want boyfriend, girlfriends, but we don't know how. Teach us how. And I said, that's very interesting, because I also work with adults and couples coming to the clinic. And at Tony Attwood's clinic, there were couples too. And this was usually the main complaint in the relationship. lack of feedback, lack of affection. In other words, it's almost like the person doesn't show affection as much as the other partner or the friend would like. So that's why the program called Exploring Affection was designed at that stage by Tony Attwood and Michelle Garnett. I was there exploring the material with different groups, and we taught them affection to repair other people's feelings because they may not understand this concept. We even had a participant, he said, and that was so cute. He said, never cry, never show that you're sad because people squeeze you. So for him, a cuddle was more like a squeeze, uncomfortable. So when he was seeing his friends upset or crying, he had the tendency to go away and leave them alone because he was thinking, if it was me, I don't like when people squeeze me. So we said, that's very interesting. So we teach them words, gestures of affection, the frequency, if it's never or if it's too much, people may find it uncomfortable. And we explore different contexts. So I'm going back very quickly to the social circle activity. It's also in my book. And we teach them with, if it's a close friend, can I give a cuddle? Can I give a kiss on the cheek? If it's my teacher, can I give a kiss on the cheek? Is this appropriate or not? So we're not giving a recipe, but we're teaching boundaries, limits, to make sure that they are appropriate. And we encourage them, in fact, to show affection, to share feelings with other people around. And that's interesting, a quick word, because when I started my research and clinical work, there was so many papers and even in conferences, people were saying, autistic persons, individuals, they don't show affection, they don't have empathy. And I said, no, it's just that they show it in a different way because they care so much. In fact, especially parents, caregivers, they are even more sensitive than compared to many neurotypical people. They have emotion, they are super sensitive. It's just the way they share it. It's sometimes more practical. They may do something to show that they care, but it may not be with words or gestures. So this is why when we've learned about the empathy, the affection, there is a quiz online on empathy from Baron Cohen and his colleagues. And many of my clients, when they complete this quiz, it shows that they don't have empathy. And I say, that's wrong. It's not fair. You have empathy. You just don't demonstrate it the same way. So if we go on the next slide, that's the program that was designed, cognitive behavior strategies, to explore with young people. And to be honest with you, I also use it with adults because the feedback is the same no matter the age, and to teach words, gestures of affection. And we've seen very good results in these activities, and it's a lot of fun as well. So that's part of the work we do with also teenagers.
Excellent, excellent. So much there, so many questions. We're going to try and get through as many of those as possible. Now, you had mentioned something about, you used an anecdote about, is it appropriate to give your teacher a kiss on the cheek?
Yeah.
We had a question earlier about a young child who's clearly been taught what is appropriate affection, and hugs are an appropriate affection for friendship. But it makes their teacher uncomfortable when they hug them.
Exactly.
And so you've got kind of that mixed messaging. Any suggestions for help unpacking that?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a huge one. And especially, like for example, I'm working in a school at the moment, and this is one of the main issue. Teachers say when they were young, that was cute. They were giving cuddles and all this, but now they're teenagers. Sometimes they're even bigger than the teacher, and they may have sexual reaction that is not sexually intended to the teacher. But if you give a hug to a male student, he may have an erection because he just feels a sensation. It's not necessarily sexual, but you imagine the discomfort. So that's why it's super important as soon as possible to teach them that a cuddle should be left at home for siblings and parents. So again, the social circle activity, I use it for most of my intervention because it's universal. And for example, we use color coded. Green is the first circle, is me, my intimacy. What is okay? In my intimacy, for example, it's my bedroom. I can undress. If ever I want to touch my private part, it's in my bedroom. So we put a picture, so to make it very visual, me my intimacy, my bedroom, and then there is private parts of the body. If we go, the next circle is family and siblings. We put yellow, like traffic lights. Yellow means careful, slow down. So I can cuddle mom or dad, I can give a kiss on the cheek to my brother, sister. But when it comes to the other circle, my teachers, like me, I'm their sexologist, psychologist. If they want to give me a cuddle or a kiss because they're happy to see me, I will teach them that I can do high five, a tap on the shoulder, like in pandemic we were doing this sign, but they won't give me. And I teach them limits. It's not that I don't like them or don't care, but I want them to learn. I'm a good person, I will never do something negative. But if they go and kiss and hug teachers, educators, people they meet in camps, group homes, the risk is again to make people uncomfortable or to send the message that they are vulnerable, because predators see this as a sign of vulnerability. So to protect them on both sides, we teach them the limits. So for example, I usually recommend, in the school I'm working at the moment, the teachers are fantastic, but I say, teach your students other ways. Instead of giving hugs or kisses, it should not be allowed. It's not, in fact, it's not appropriate, because otherwise they may generalize to any other caregiver they meet without knowing if it's right or wrong. So find other ways. It can be verbal. Hi, happy to meet you. Happy to see you. Good, good. Or a sign, whatever. But eventually, this is usually what I recommend is to use the social circle activity. And no matter the age and the level of autism, it works well because we use section, rules, and pictures.
Okay. When it comes to like parents, caregivers having the conversations for the first time with teens,
Yep.
can you point us to? You did a very good job of outlining the steps with young people. Can you point us to a resource or outline the steps as it relates to introducing the topic of sexuality to teens?
Yeah, usually what I would recommend is to share books. It's very important because when it comes to parents, it may create discomfort because there's emotions involved. So let's start, even if it doesn't look like teenage material, let's talk with friends. Start with friendship, because if you want to be a good partner eventually, first you have to be a good friend. So take examples of if they play games with friends, the attitude, the feedback they give to friends, the respect, the consent. So we rapidly go in the consent section, because when we talk about teenagers, we need to talk about steps of relationship. For example, if you meet someone, you start with being friends, getting to know the person. It means you can invite them at home, you can go in a public place to be safe, the movie theater, you go for a snack, and we teach them, for example, topics. We give them a list of topics that are okay to discuss in dates and topics that you should avoid because they make sometimes mistakes. For example, you should talk about hobbies, you can talk about your favorite interest, you can talk about project for the summer. You should avoid talking about sexuality right away because the other person may find it uncomfortable. You don't comment on physical attributes, for example. One of my clients, I'll try to be very practical. He went on a date with a young woman. He was super thrilled. And he said to her, very nice to meet you. They had a snack and a walk. And then he said, do you want to have kids? And then she said, yeah, no, I'm not sure. He said, I need to know because when I'm going to be 25, I want a family. So you should say to me right away, do you want to have children? And she said, not comfortable with that. Came back to the clinic. He said, oh, what have I done? I said, you see, it's not negative intention, but this is in the other section of the don't talk about it too quickly. You may, create a discomfort. So we have topics of conversation, appropriate gestures when you get to know the person, and also eventually the steps in maybe getting closer to the person. You may hold hands, you may then have a cuddle or hands on the shoulder, at what time, and always to check if you are happy with this, if you are comfortable, and check the consent with the other person. So these are the steps that we're teaching teenagers.
Okay. There's some questions here around sexual identity. I want to point out that there was a whole webinar on that topic, and I don't think we're going to have time to get into identity and how it relates into this. other webinars in the resources section about this topic in particular that you could dive deeper on. We're going to do one more question before we wrap up. And that is, how does a young man on the spectrum approach a young woman without appearing awkward? This might be too big of a question to handle at the end here, but if you have any strategies or suggestions, that would be great.
Yeah, and you see, before answering, I'll take a little detour. That's why we have the group sessions to work together. Because when we have girls in the group, they say, when guys they come too quickly and they say, I like you, you look good, do you want to be my girlfriend? I feel uncomfortable. How can we do it in another way? And we role play together. Again, we're not just pointing mistakes, because that would be very difficult and boring. We show them appropriate models. So we have a whole set of videos of flirting or stalking. That's a very good video that I use. So flirting it's an art. When you think about it, the art of flirting. So you take your time, you talk about a general topic, you may give a compliment. So we give them a list of nice, friendly compliments that are not physical attribute or sexual, because it's okay to compliment and you won't look awkward. But if you say something too quickly or too sexual, that's going to be awkward. So we use the video from Social Signals. I think we have the link in the section. Otherwise, I'll add it. It's called Mike's Day. Mike is a guy, teenager. He wants to flirt with Sasha. So one part of the video, he's awkward. He's too quick. He wants to hold her. He wants to kiss. He keeps on telling her like tons and tons of compliments. The more she back off, the more he's insisting. And then the next part of the video is Mike's good day and how he can flirt appropriately. So this is the video I use for this type of question or topic. And then again, the beauty of the group is we role play together, and then we correct mistakes. Oh, that was maybe too hard, too quick. How can we do it instead? And then boys and girls, male, female, will give feedback to each other in a positive and productive way.
Excellent. Okay, and with that, I know that we scratched the surface today. I know we referenced it 1,000 times, but please go to the resource section. There's a ton there. There's a ton on the Autism Ontario website, including webinars on this topic, as well as sexual identity or gender identity and the like. That is all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Isabelle. It was very, very, very interesting. A reminder to everybody out there, this webinar will be recorded. It will be available on demand on the Autism Ontario website at some point tomorrow, like all of our webinars. If you found the information valuable, please share this with other people, family members, caregivers. The more people we have through this program, the more of these we're able to put on. And with that, I want to thank you for your participation. Have yourselves a great day, and we'll see you next time on our next Autism Ontario event.
Goodbye.